My name is Steve Ebbets. I'm a senior engineer for VMware. Department of Defense is one of the accounts that I cover as an engineer, helping them architect solutions using our products. I want to talk a little bit today about using VMware vShield in the Department of Defense DISA's reference architecture, and I'll get more into that in just a second. But standard marketing slide, talk that, be talking about some new products that will be coming out, so I have to use this so that the legal people are happy with me. Okay. All right. So what am I going to talk about? First, I want to talk about the Department of Defense DISA's Network Infrastructure Technology Overview. It's a document that they put out. Then I want to take a little turn and talk about our vShield product line and some of the technical capabilities built into that. Then what I'd like to do is kind of combine the two and show how, using our vShield product line, I could actually implement the DISA reference architecture in a virtual environment. Now, one caveat I want to get out up front. The architecture I'm going to talk about has not been blessed by DISA. It's just a sort of a reference architecture idea that I have that I wanted to kind of get out there. We've actually been briefing DISA on the vShield product lines. We've been talking with Mr. Richard Hale, the Director of Information Assurance, briefing him on the vShield product line. But as yet, so I want to let you know that this is not blessed by DISA. I just want to get that out up front. So DISA, back in August of 2010, released a document called the Network Infrastructure Technology Overview. Okay? And as part of this overview, DISA included a best practices architecture to provide perimeter defense for an enclave. Okay? So what they did is basically say, okay, if you're going to stand up a compute center, right, and you're going to attach it to the NIPR, what you need to do is this is how we recommend you secure it. Okay? So what I'm going to do is look at that references and then tie that back into our vShield product and do that in a totally virtual environment. So what did that network architecture talk about? Okay? One of the things was these requirements that they set forth in this document were designed basically to assist with configuring and maintaining security controls. It didn't mandate what you had to do. It simply put forth suggestions. They go on to say in that document that if you really want to look at securing your network, look to the DISA STIGs, the Security Technical Implementation Guides that DISA puts out. So they recommend in that document that you go back to there to really look on how to tighten and secure a network environment. This was more of a reference architecture, right? Sort of if you want to build it, these are some of the practices we think we should use. One of the interesting things it did is also it recommended defense in depth. Everybody's pretty familiar with that concept, but the idea is I don't just stick a single firewall at the edge and I'm done. Okay? Defense in depth means we've got to do a little bit more than that. The analogy I like to use for defense in depth is, heard this years ago from a speaker, was if you think about a medieval castle and defense in depth, the first thing you got to when you went to a castle, there was the moat and the wall. Okay? So that's basically today, that's your perimeter firewall. But then once you got inside, you couldn't get to the armory without getting past guards. You certainly couldn't get to the crown jewels without getting past a number of extra guards. So basically what we do is we protect the perimeter to keep the bad guys out. And then we also now start protecting our sensitive applications or sensitive information. And then we start segmenting people off to keep them secure and away from data they don't need access to. Okay? Also, one of the things in the document, one of the things they mention is the use of firewalls. Multiple firewalls, multiple layers. Okay? So not just a single firewall, but multiple firewalls that allow me to control access to different applications. And then they looked at, as I moved lower in the stack, they looked at restricting client access based on VLANs. Okay? So basically they said, well, now we need to make sure that if you really don't need to see the financial data, we'll VLAN off that network. You can't be on that network if you don't have the rights to it. So I'm not going to make you read this eye chart. I'll break this down. But basically this was their reference. So let's kind of zoom in a little bit. Let me bring this up a little bit. So basically this was their architecture reference. Okay? And you notice they've got, come on you. That's not working very well. if you notice, the green, the light green color, is the internet accessible applications. So those are basically your web servers that now bring it back. And then you have your yellow, which is more access to databases, email servers, and things like that. And then your orange is more and more of the other applications. Now, if you notice, once again, you can see multiple firewalls. Okay? So they are saying, let's get this all in. They've got, as I come through the router, through the internet, I get through my first firewall. I got intrusion detection, intrusion protection services. Then I come down, more and more of my applications are firewall protected. And then if I move even down further, in this stack, we can see the same thing. As I move down to my client services, I've got databases, I've got application servers all segmented off. And once again, you can see firewalled off. And then I may reach out to some other enclave, and I've got that all fired off wall as well. So this was their recommended architecture. Okay? So how does that tie in? As you can see, their use of firewalls to protect everything. But you notice also, there's only a couple. If you notice what's interesting, their management LAN is not firewalled off. If you also notice, the database security, they got a little gateway there, app servers, no protection from the other applications. So everything was protected by a single firewall. So they, in this concept of the castle, they've got the moat, they've got the castle wall, but inside there's not a lot of protection otherwise in their reference architecture. Part of that issue, too, when I do that and I just put up, I start firewalling things off with physical firewalls, is I run into a couple of issues. Right? First and foremost, if I start putting multiple firewalls in place, physical firewalls or appliances even, what I run into is I've got a number of different places I have to go to provision things, right? I have to set up different admin roles. I now have to set up different point solutions that I have to manage separately. Okay? One of the interesting things is if I've got like agents installed in a virtual environment to do virus scanning, and then every day at, say, noon, I kick that off. Well, you can imagine the resources that's going to use. Right? Once again, labor-intensive compliance in order to configure these firewalls. Right? I've got to go out and manually check the settings. I go out and do manual assessments. How do I make sure the policies haven't changed? I need to go out to, how often do I need to go out to these devices to check my firewall rules to make sure the policies haven't changed? What if I need to add a new rule to the firewall? I've got to go around to each firewall now and add all that rules to each and every one of them. So it starts adding a lot of complexity to these traditional physical separated networks. So we'll talk a little bit now about vShield and how vShield can change some of this complexity I just talked about, how we can move away from a physical divided firewall into more virtual firewalls that now provide a lot less complexity and a lot of ease of use around protecting your network. So the vShield product family has three major pieces in a manager. So basically, the first piece is vShield Edge. And this is basically a virtual firewall, layer 2 firewall, that allows you to protect the edge of a virtual data center. Okay? Then we also offer vShield App. vShield App is a layer 2 and 3 and layer 4 firewall that allows me now to separate my applications from each other at a virtual layer. vShield Endpoint is actually a tool to offload some of your antivirus processing so I don't have to do my processing on my end users. And then, of course, we manage everything through vShield Manager that sits out there that manages all these different virtual environments and also plugs into Virtual Center so that I can now manage all my security settings from within Virtual Center. So what is vShield Edge? So, vShield Edge is designed to protect the VMware. Think about it, this is once again the castle wall, the castle moat that protects the edge of your environment. I can use it to protect a single environment, If I want to host multiple tenants or multiple organizations, say I got several groups that I'm now tasked to host their applications, their workloads, I can put vShield Edge in place and now segment off these other environments. What this does is rather than me having to simply now, you've got to take the workload for this organization, stand it up in your data center. You need to support these people now. Okay, I got to firewall that off. Okay, let me go out, order a firewall, put it in the rack, configure it, mount it, put it in. With vShield Edge, what I can do is simply fire off another virtual appliance, turn it on, manage it through Virtual Center. I've got my firewall up and running. I've got my virtual workloads now protected. So we're taking some of that physical environment security, moving it to the virtual environment so that now I can provision it, just like I can provision workloads much faster in a virtual environment. Now I can virtualize firewalls much faster and do my segmentation and security right off the bat. Okay. So what is Edge? What does Edge do? So basically it's a layer 2 firewall. Allows you to do stateful inspection of packets. I can now say, okay, anyone coming from 192.168 can't get to 192.167. I can now set my standard firewall rules there. But it can also do network address translation. So suppose I've got some workloads I need to manage. I can set them up without giving them real IP addresses. I can start saving real IP addresses and then just route everything through the vShield Edge. It can also do DHCP. So as I bring new workloads in and turn them up, fire them up, guess what? I can now give them IP addresses from the edge without having to stand up other DHCP servers. One of the really interesting things that I like about it is the capability of doing site-to-site VPN, okay, using IPsec. What's interesting is, say I've got a data center, and then I've got a small remote office. But I want to give them access to our network, but I don't want to have to, stand up a physical VPN box. Well, if you run a vShield on both ends of that virtual data centers on both sides, I can now set up an IPsec-based virtual LAN that my people can now use. It also acts as a web load balancer, so I can balance web traffic across it. One of the new things in the 5.0 release that's coming out in September will be the capability of actually doing static routing. And also, what's key, and especially in the DoD environment, is I can now, that IPsec VPN, I can now use my own certificates. So you can now go out, request a certificate, use that in a VPN, a DoD-approved cert, as opposed to using our built-in cert. We've also added the capability of REST APIs. So if I need to do some kind of scripting to call it out, I can do that. And also we use syslog for our logging capabilities. So Edge can log all that information that you have. So what's nice is I get these multi-functionality within a virtual appliance as opposed to having to do this with multiple physical boxes. What is vShield App? vShield App is a hypervisor level firewall. Okay? If you think about a hypervisor, okay, where it sits, it's sitting on top of that bare metal. Okay? It sees the 4 core resources that applications and operating systems use, right? It sees the network traffic. It sees everything that's going into RAM. It sees everything the CPU is doing. Okay? It sees everything that's going to storage. So we can see all that traffic. So why don't we move the security layer down to the hypervisor layer rather than basing it on the OS level? And that's what vShield App is designed to do. What it allows you to do is now set your firewall policies at the virtual NIC level, okay? As opposed to having to do it at the physical NIC or out to a physical firewall and then bring your traffic back in. It allows me now to put the hypervisor as the firewall layer. Okay? So it installs as a ESX kernel, so it loads directly with the ESXi kernel, and I can now set up to monitor traffic at that layer. But the really nice thing about that is, say I set a policy for this one virtual machine that says only addresses from a certain range are allowed to access this virtual machine using this protocol. If I'm using dynamic resource scheduling or vMotion and I move that virtual machine to another ESX server that also has VF installed, the policies follow it. Okay? So think about that for a second. I've set my security policy once. It doesn't matter where that virtual machine moves in my environment. If I have vShield app installed on my ESX servers, it's going to know about the rules associated with that virtual machine and bring those around. So, one of the nice things, capabilities, is our layer 4 firewall. I can set policies around that. I can enforce based on application. Okay, I can simply go in and say, all right, any destination, HTTP, allow. If I want to do DNS, allow. But others, I might deny. But I can do it at a higher level. I don't have to keep going down and be very specific. And now, just block it on the application level. Also with vShield app, we've introduced the concept of 2 different ways of protecting your environment. In Virtual Center, we've got the concept of I can set up clusters, I can set up data centers, resource pools, port groups, things like that. I can go in using vShield app and protect and set rules based on those definitions defined in Virtual Center. So if I want to say for this resource pool, allow this traffic in. For this resource pool, allow this traffic in. Okay? Or I can also make it based on groups. And in this case, what we've done is you'll see I've got a couple different setups. I've got a group defined as business apps. So a resource pool called business apps, which has Active Directory and SharePoint showing up. And then I've got some virtual desktops I've built. And I've got this in a groups, and I've got corporate users and contractors. Now I can simply go in and set a rule that says, allow DNS traffic from the business app group down to the DNS server. I can also allow VMs to web tier to communicate with the database tier. But one of the also things I can do is I can deny, just basically go in and set a rule that says deny contractors access to the business apps. So I can simply go in the Virtual Center, go to the vApp tab, go in, go right-click, and now build my policies based on groups. I don't have to remember arcane rules and specify, okay, well, contractors have this IP address, I need to do this, this, and this. I can simply set it up to deny based on a group approach. So vShield Endpoint, once again, the idea of taking the hypervisor layer and making that one of my security tools is where we're doing with the endpoint. And the idea about endpoint is to offload all those things we do on an operating system. Okay? One of the first things you think about, anybody trying to insert a virus into an operating system, first thing they're going to check to see is they're going to check to see if there's an antivirus program installed, and if they got the capability, how to disable that. Well, what if I offloaded that to a different virtual machine? Okay? So it allows me now to pull those resources off of the virtual machine of the virtual OS and move them off to a virtual appliance that can now do that virus scan for me. So what happens is I now set up a security policy and I install a virtual appliance, which is Endpoint, and then what happens is now, instead of the scan on the operating system, what I do is say, okay, you're accessing this file. Hold on, let me grab that. I will build that, and I will scan it. Okay. So what happens, I get away from all this OS-based processing. So I can do things like data loss prevention scanning, intrusion detection scanning. I can do these from virtual appliances as opposed to having to do this on a physical device or on each OS. So the idea, the concept behind Edge is we've developed the sort of a gateway into the hypervisor layer. And now we're going to depend on our partners like Trend, Kaspersky, and others to build the antivirus, to build the intrusion detection platforms that take advantage of Edge. We're not going to build the security tools. Edge is simply a way for other security vendors now to tap into our virtual layer so they can get down to the hypervisor. And now, partnering with them, we can now offload most of that person. So, endpoint security, sec1980, allows us to do basically virtual appliances. Okay, we do still install a thin agent, but with the next release, that thin agent is actually going to be part of tools that you install on a VM machine. We're going to be able to support multiple hosts, right? So I could have one doing antivirus. I could have another one doing intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, data loss prevention, scanning, things like that. So, if I take that first eye chart we saw, right, which shows all the reference architecture with the firewalls, and I now start to put in vShield, what is that going to look like from an environment's perspective? Okay, so now I'm going to take this from this totally physical environment, and I want to try to put it into a virtual environment. What would that look like? Okay, so this is sort of the concept I've come up with. Let me see if I get this pen working. So basically, we've got our standard connection out to the NIPRNet, and then I come down, and what I've done is I've got vShield Edge, the little shield design there, that I can now segment off different virtual applications. And then if I look to the right, I can see now that I've got all my web traffic, but also what I can do is I can place my vShield app in between each of these logical groups of machines. So we're in between the light green, the yellow, and the sort of orange colors. I can put vShield app, and now I can control traffic with virtual appliances, basically. I can control policy between all these different applications. I can do the same for the other side, for the end users. And so when I looked at that second picture where I had end users, right? Now I could use vShield Edge to segment off my end users. I can also segment off my management LAN, right? So now I can protect users from actually getting to my devices that are part of my management LAN, because I don't want users being able to see, over into my management space. And all the virtual machines, the user workstations, I can also segment them off with vShield app, and now I can control, once again, when we look back at the example of the contractors, I can actually control where those users, what applications they get to see from a virtual environment, and I don't have to route them out to a physical firewall. I could also do some neat things around desktops too. I could create virtual desktops that only have access to internal, they can't get out to the internet. Okay? Or I could have a virtual desktop that says if you want to get out to the internet, you have to use this pool of virtual desktops. So very interesting things about what I can control just using vShield app to control who can see what. I can control what application can see what application. I can even go down and say, you come to this web server, this SharePoint server. That SharePoint server, because I've got VApp installed, can only see these two databases, even though I've got 5 database virtual machines running on the CSX host. So I can now begin to control at a fine-grained level the communication between my web servers and my database servers and my app servers. Another interesting concept could be an enclave in a box, right? So suppose I needed to go deploy somewhere and I wanted to be able to stand up a quick network. I could actually do this in almost, if I had a limited number of requirements for different applications, I could actually do this in a single platform, right? Because if you think about it, I've got my virtual NICs on that first layer sitting above the ESXi host. I've got my web servers, I've got my database servers, app servers, email, web servers, and then I've also got my management LAN. Okay? So I could set up one physical server, 3 NICs. I could have vShield Edge protecting my connection out to the internet gateway. I could then also have my database servers firewalled off from my app servers so I can make sure I'm only routing traffic back through there. And the instances of vShield app, that could be just one instance of VC app. I don't need to apply it. I've generally put 4 there just to show how I could segment it off, but actually that would be just one instance of vShield app installed. And now I can control access between my app servers, database servers, back to my email. I could firewall my email off. I could also, all my other security servers and my database servers and end users could all be firewalled off. I could also then set up my own dedicated network for my management servers so that now users can't access the management LAN, but the management LAN can now see all the rest of the network. So I could actually roll out using the reference architecture that DISA built and now roll this out as a pure virtual environment and roll this out with fully protected, once again, with layer 2, layer 3, layer 4 firewalling, just like they recommend. I've got defense in depth, like the architecture mentioned, but I could do this in a single ESXi instance. So I can now stick to those DISA requirements, but also have them now in a single box that I could deploy out somewhere. So one of the interesting things about using vShield as opposed to physical security is I don't have to deploy physical hardware. Right? I don't have to go out and have multiple point solutions to do all my issues. I now as I begin to virtualize in my data center, I now have a way, a cost-effective way of having multiple copies of virtual firewalls, if you will, that I can rapidly deploy. I can get out there. I can stand up quickly without having to, stack and rack them. Also, it cuts down a lot of the complexity of applying different rules and policies. For example, because I can do so much firewalling, I don't have to do as much VLANs. Okay, I can eliminate some of the VLAN things that I need to do. Okay, it's also I can now control it through Virtual Center. So what I can do now is set my security policies through a common interface that I'm used to using every day. I could also use role-based admin access, create roles for basically security people that could come in and set my rules, good or bad, up to your organization. And also the capability of setting up the policies around a single virtual machine that I can migrate around my network. Okay? Think about how hard that would be if I had to move virtual machine to virtual machine. I'd have to run back to my firewall every time and change the rules because my virtual machine has now moved around. But by using vShield, I now get much less complexity in how I set up my environment. So now I'd like to take some time and open up the floor to any questions. The one we have today is not going on yet. We're actually, that's a good point. I'll talk about that real quick. The IPsec will be undergoing FIPS 140. Also, the common criteria, not the 5.0 release, but one of the next dot releases afterwards. We're going to be putting through common criteria. One of the keys we're trying to do there is we will make sure we get EAL 4+. So we need to add some stuff in so we make sure we want to guarantee we get that. So that's why we're holding off on that. But that's one of the things too is we've been talking with DISA a lot about is they're telling us good stuff, common criteria, got to hit that checkbox. So, yes, sir. Immediate. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's there are mics. The question was, how fast are the changes implemented once I make a change in the policy? And it's actually immediate because if you think about it, I've got vShield app sitting there. I go through the vShield. I go and I change the policies. I had to define another port group or another HTTP as being blocked. It'll be automatic because the VMs are sitting behind that vShield app or the edge. Performance impact, about the same as a standard firewall. So I think what's this industry average, like 5%, something like that. So not great. I've still got to route traffic through it. So, role-based administration. So I can do that either through vShield Manager or I can do it through Virtual Center. Right. Right. So the question is, I've got my security group who's setting the security policies at the resource pool level. I've got my Virtual Center admins who can now move virtual machines between resource pools. And the question is, how do you mitigate against that happening? Right? That's almost a policy decision where you'd have to either really lock down and say, you're only allowed to have these resource pools. You need other ID to get into these resource pools. It's almost more of a policy. Expenditure. Yes, sir. Multiple security, multi-level security, right? But, where? On the same hardware, right. So the question is, can I virtualize different levels of information on the same physical hardware? Interesting you brought that up. Actually went through this battle with this, was it last summer or 2 summers ago? Because what's happening was they were having to grow out the size of the DMZs, okay, which meant a lot more physical hardware. And they realized it was going to cost a fortune to do that. They said, well, why can't we virtualize a lot of this and virtualize our DMZs? So talk went around and around and around, and what was finally decided by Mr. Hale and his team was you could virtualize your DMZ, but you still had to physically separate the hardware from what was basically that came into the DMZ web servers, the public access web servers, but anything that was being able to route into the DISA network itself had to be on separate physical hardware. So we fought that battle a couple of years ago, and that's where the decision came down at this point. So one of the problems was what they were looking at was in order to do what they wanted to do was actually take a look at doing a common criteria assessment of the hypervisor. We do EAL level 4 plus right now. Basically, what they wanted was for us to do it as basically like an EAL level 7. Would have taken us like 2.5 years to do that. So it's kind of impractical to lock it down that tight to prove that it would. The harder thing is proving data loss between virtual machines. The concept that I've got a physical switch, that one virtual machine can leak data to another virtual machine switch was really hard to prove that it doesn't occur. You know, we believe that our code is strong enough that it doesn't. We've got some other agencies that agree with us, but this is still one of that separate physical separation. Yes, sir. Yes. So do you want to harden the OS or?
Basically, yeah, the tools we go in and have hardening policy tools. Do that across?
We have another tool for that called Configuration Manager that can actually go out and apply the STIG to each of the OSs that you have out there. And that's not in the vShield product family. Another product you might want to look at while you're out here called Configuration Manager has that capability. Actually, go ahead and apply the DISA STIG. Yes, sir.
For one of the examples you show for vShield app, you showed both the destination application and destination port. Aren't they same? Or when you are configuring the application, the port is masked?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
For the vShield app example, whatever you showed the destination application and destination port. You said you can control the policies using the destination application. Aren't they same, destination application and destination port?
I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time. You want to control the The destination?
Application, you said like in a DNS or web server.
Right.
And also you said, I mean, in that same slide, it talked about destination port.
Right.
TCP port. But aren't they same, both of them, destination application and destination port?
I can control it at the port level if I want. I can just control it at the protocol layer. So, some protocols can sometimes use the higher layer ports. It'll monitor those higher ports to make sure HTTP is not trying to use one of the higher ports.
Like, for example, I mean, HTTP, you showed HTTP and then destination port as any in the slide. So does that mean even if HTTP protocol happens to be on non-80, you will be able to figure that out?
It's on a different port as opposed to the standard, like port 80.
Yeah.
So you've defined an application with a non-standard port?
Yeah, if you just have a web server on non-80 port, I mean,
then you would have to go in and define the port.
I see.
If you're using non-standard protocol ports, I think you'd have to go in and actually set that.
I see. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So the question is about redundancy. Would I apply multiple vShield apps? You could. You could also rely on, because like vShield app is at the hypervisor layer, it loads them as a kernel, so that you wouldn't have to, because it's going to, if that ESX box crashes, that ESX box crashes. Everything would migrate off using HA, high availability. For things like Edge, you could deploy two, just in case one went down, so you could set one up on one ESX server and one up on another. You could do that as well. At vShield Manager, you could set up as that one, because vShield Manager controls all the policies. Today that would be a hard failover. So basically, you'd have to tie that into sort of an HA environment. Yes, sir.
You mentioned about being able to tie policies to resource pools. What about tying into Active Directory groups?
Okay, sorry. The question is, if I can tie the security policies to resource pools, can I tie them to Active Directory groups? So actually, it's defining groups within Active Directory.
So physical workstations that will attach to virtual servers.
From within, you can't get that granular yet today. We can't do that yet today. So it's still going to be based on what Virtual Center knows about. Okay. Yes, sir. The other products, Edge app will continue to work. You just can't make any changes to them until Manager comes back up. So it's much like Virtual Center. Everything still works. You just can't make changes. Yes, sir. The question is, does vShield Edge work with HBSS? That's McAfee, right? That's a question for McAfee, because we keep asking them about that as well. Right now, the only solution that's shipping with Edge, Trend Microsystems, has one out. But we've been asking customers to go to Symantec, McAfee, and ask them to support these different viruses for Edge. So, yes, sir, in the back. Can't really mention that in public. Catch up with me offline. Some things I can say in public, some things I can't. So. Anything? Oh, yes, sir.
Do you know when they're going to, I mean, last year we went through an audit with them, and their guidance was at best at version 3.2 of ESX. And, now it seems like they're doing a lot of snooping as of the last 6 months, probably in line with some of the stuff that they're talking to you about. One of the things they're stating is like, oh, your VMs can't, any VM that's on, your cluster, whether it has anything to do with us or not, is now in scope. And then they back off and then they come back. So is there any guidance as far as from your area or from even DISA when they're actually going to solidify what they're doing? Because an unbalanced expectation here. We don't know where we're going. Do we have to buy hardware or do we shield? It's very confusing.
Right. So I haven't seen much coming out of them lately. They did the STIG for 3.5. We still don't have the STIG for 4.0 out, and we're shipping 5.0. So we're still waiting for DISA's policy to catch up.
Yeah, because they need to go through basically 300 pages of miscellaneous documents to get
Yeah. And one of the things we're trying to do to make life simpler is, with the 5.0 environment, we're moving from ESX to ESXi only, so we've taken out that Linux console that we used to use. It's going to simplify your life, because now that's where the scanning used to hit on the ESX. You used to scan that Linux console, and it would turn up all these alerts. IVAs that we fixed, but for some reason would turn up as false positives. So with that gone, the scanning is actually going to be reduced against your virtual environment. It's going to be more targeted to the OS layer now, as opposed to up to the ESX environment.
Here's a question back on your physical world aspect. I'm just curious about it. One of the things that even Medicare is pushing for our area is separate VLANs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's very easy to trunk out separate VLANs.
Yep.
If we had a separate VLAN and they used a traditional firewall, would that technically, from your aspect, not an official word, but from your aspect, actually separate those VMs from the other VMs, because technically there's a physical firewall now replacing it?
Yeah, because vShield app and vShield app still support VLAN. So I can now VLAN off. If I'm VLAN and then I've got a physical firewall out there, sure, all the better. Thanks. Yes, sir.
Question from an auditing standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Can I see attempted access between different zones, scales, times, communication, and all that stuff?
So the question is around auditing. Can I see what's going on? Yes. Yeah. All the between Edge and vShield app, we actually audit. We created a syslog for all those attempts. And I didn't mention this, but one of the neat things about vShield app is the capability of doing flow monitoring. So if I wanted to, I could actually go in and see the raw data flowing between the different source and destination files if I really wanted to see what was going on underneath. But yeah, and one of the nice things about using vShield app is, since it's at the hypervisor layer, if I've got one virtual machine on the same ESX server and I've got another virtual machine and they're talking across the virtual switch, if I had a physical firewall, I'd have to go out and firewall that traffic out to the physical firewall, bring it back in. But because I'm at the virtual layer and I'm using vShield at the virtual layer, I can set up the firewall across that virtual switch. So I can now control and I can see what's going on between these virtual machines that are sitting on the same ESX host without having to route them out to a physical device. Yes, sir. IPv6 is, yeah, it's supported. Yes, sir.
So just you're talking about flow monitoring. Is that going to be output via syslog as well, or will you be able to log that information?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Let me look that up for you. I'll get with you offline.
Do you have a ballpark as to how many VMs one endpoint appliance can monitor?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to, you know what, I'm going to talk to Trend and see what they recommend, because they're the ones right now that have a shipping product with Edge. So let me see what they recommend. Yeah. Because I'm going to say, I want to say hundreds, but based on scheduling of when you do that. So. Okay. Well, thank you again. Thanks so much for coming out this morning. Appreciate it, and enjoy the conference.